Hi, boys and girls. Hope you're doing okay today. It's pretty cold outside, but we're going to be reading a chapter about summertime. So at the end, we're going to be pulling out our sunglasses and we're going to have a little bit of music. So if you want to pause right now and get your sunglasses out, that is great. So here we go. I do want to warn you one thing though. My bear has attracted my dog Goldie. You can see her under there sleeping. So if you hear snoring, it's just my dog. Here we go with summertime. Now it was summertime and people went fishing. Sometimes Uncle Henry or Uncle George or Grandpa came riding out of the big woods to see Pa. Ma would come to the door and ask how all the folks were, and she would say, Charles is in the clearing. I'm going to show you a picture of the clearing. Then she would cook more dinner than usual, and dinner time would be longer. Pa and Ma and the visitor would sit talking a little while before they went back to work. Kind of like your parents probably do when you're having a dinner party. Sometimes Ma let Laura and Mary go across the road and down the hill to see Miss Peterson. The Petersons had just moved in. Their house was new and always very neat because Mrs. Peterson had no little girls to muss it up. She was a Swede, and she let Laura and Mary look at the pretty things she had brought from Sweden, laces and colored embroideries and china. If you take a look where it says she was a Swede, whoops, tip in the buff. What does that mean? It says she was a Swede. Mrs. Peterson talked Swedish to them, and they talked English to her, and they understood each other perfectly. She always gave them each a cookie when they left, and they nibbled the cookies very slowly while they walked home. Laura nibbled away exactly half of hers, and Mary nibbled exactly half of hers, and then the other halves they saved for baby Carrie. Then when they got home, Carrie had 2 half cookies, and that was a whole cookie. Now this wasn't right. All they wanted to do was divide the cookies fairly with Carrie. Still, if Mary saved half her cookie, while Laura ate the whole of hers, or if Laura saved half and Mary ate the whole of her cookie, that wouldn't be fair either. There's a math problem in there, boys and girls. It's like a lemonade war style math problem. So what I want you to do, I want you to try to figure out what would be fair. Either different days, either you could incorporate different days into the cookie sharing, or you could incorporate the same day and just figure it out with different fractions. Think about it. They didn't know what to do, so each saved half and gave it to baby Carrie, but they always felt that somehow that wasn't quite fair, and they were right. Sometimes a neighbor sent word that the family was coming to spend the day, and then Ma did extra cleaning and cooking and opened the package of store sugar. And on the set day, the wagon would come driving up to the gate in the morning, and there would be strange children to play with. When Mr. and Mrs. Huliet came, they brought Eva and Clarence with them. Eva was a pretty girl with dark eyes and black curls. She played carefully and kept her dress clean and smooth. Mary liked that, but Laura liked better to play with Clarence. Clarence was red-headed and freckled, and always laughing. His clothes were pretty, too. He wore a blue suit buttoned all the way up the front with bright gilt buttons and trimmed with braid, and he had copper-toed shoes. The strips of copper across the toes were so glittering bright that Laura wished she were a boy, because little girls did not wear copper toes. That makes me think of really nice looking sneakers that you guys sometimes wear into school, and how exciting it is to get a new pair of shoes. And here's a really nice picture of him climbing the tree with his blue suit and his copper toed shoes and his fancy gilt buttons down the front. What does the word gilt mean according to the picture that we refer to? Think about that one. Laura wished she was a boy. Little girls didn't wear copper toes, and Laura and Clarence ran around and shouted and climbed trees, while Mary and Eva walked nicely together and talked. Ma and Mrs. Huliet visited and looked at a Godey's Ladies book, which Mrs. Huliet had brought, and Pa and Mr. Huliet looked at horses and crops and smoked their pipes together. Once Aunt Lottie came to spend the day. That morning Laura had to stand still a long time while Ma unwound her hair from the cloth strings and combed it into long curls. Mary was ready, sitting primly in a chair with her golden curls shining and her china blue dress fresh and crisp. Laura liked her own red dress, but Ma pulled on her hair dreadfully, and it was brown instead of golden, so that no one noticed it. Everyone noticed and admired Mary's. Here we go with the jealousy that we saw in the last chapter. There, Ma said at last, your hair is curled beautifully, and Lottie is coming. Run to meet her, both of you, and ask her which she likes best, brown curls or golden curls. Laura and Mary ran out the door and down the path, for Aunt Lottie was already at the gate. Aunt Lottie was a big girl, much taller than Mary. Her dress was beautiful pink, and she was swinging a pink sunbonnet by one string. "Which do you like best, Aunt Lottie?" Mary asked. "Brown curls or golden curls?" Ma had told them to ask, and Mary was a very little girl who always did exactly as she was told. Laura waited to hear what Aunt Lottie would say and felt miserable. "I like both kinds best," Aunt Lottie said, smiling. She took Laura and Mary by the hand, one on each side, and they danced along to the door where Ma stood. The sunshine came streaming through the windows into the house, and everything was so neat and pretty. The table was covered with a red cloth, and the cook stove was polished shining black. Through the bedroom door Laura could see the big trundle bed in its place under the big bed. The pantry door stood wide open, giving the sight and smell of goodies on the shelves, and Black Susan came purring down the stairs from the attic, where she'd been taking a nap. It was all so pleasant, and Laura felt so gay and good that no one would ever have thought she could be as naughty as she was that evening. That was a little bit of foreshadowing. Take a look. Everything was happy, and she could never believe that she would be as naughty as she was that night. Let's see what happens. Obviously, the author is foreshadowing that she's going to be a little bit naughty. Aunt Lottie had gone, and Laura and Mary were tired and cross. They were at the woodpile gathering a pan of chips to kindle the fire in the morning. They always hated to pick up wood chips, but every day they had to do it. Tonight they hated it more than ever. Laura grabbed the biggest chip, and Mary said, "I don't care. Aunt Lottie likes my hair better anyway. Golden hair is lots prettier than brown." Laura's throat swelled up tight, and she could not speak. She knew that golden hair was prettier than brown. She couldn't speak, so she reached out quickly and slapped Mary's face. Then she heard Pa say, "Come here, Laura." She went slowly, dragging her feet. Pa was sitting just inside the door. He had seen her slap Mary. "You remember," Pa said, "I told you girls you must never strike each other." Laura began, but Mary said, "It makes no difference," said Pa. "It is what I say that you must mind." Then he took down a strap from the wall, and he whipped Laura with the strap. And boys and girls, you may get different punishments now, but in the 1800s, punishments were very different, and parents chose different ways to punish their children. Nowadays, I give my kids timeouts from their technology. They don't allowed to use their phones or their video games, and that's how they get their timeouts. But back then, they didn't have technology, so they had different punishments. Laura sat on a chair in the corner and sobbed, and when she stopped sobbing, she sulked. The only thing in the whole world to be glad about was that Mary had to fill the chip pan all by herself. At last, when it was getting dark, Pa said again, "Come here, Laura." His voice was kind, and when Laura came, he took her on his knee and hugged her close. She sat in the crook of his arm, her head against his shoulder, and his long brown whiskers partly covering her eyes, and everything was all right again. Here's a picture of that hug and those cuddles. She told Pa all about it, and she asked him, "You don't like golden hair better than brown, do you?" Pa's blue eyes shone down at her, and he said, "Well, Laura, my hair is brown." She had not thought of that. Pa's hair was brown, and his whiskers were brown, and she thought brown was a lovely color, but she was glad that Mary had to gather all the chips. Maybe she didn't learn her lesson. In the summer evenings, Pa did not tell stories or play the fiddle. Summer days were long, and he was tired after he had worked hard all day out in the fields. Ma was busy too. Laura and Mary helped her weed the garden, and they helped her feed the calves and the hens. They gathered the eggs, and they helped to make cheese. When the grass was tall and thick in the woods, and the cows were giving plenty of milk, then that was the time to make cheese. Somebody must kill a calf, for cheese could not be made without rennet, and rennet is the lining of a young calf's stomach. The calf must be young so that it had never eaten anything but milk. Now, boys and girls, that's the way that they made cheese a couple hundred years ago. Nowadays, cheesemakers know how to make artificial rennet, so you don't have to kill a calf every time that you're making cheese. But we are talking about the 1860s right now. Laura was afraid that Pa must kill one of the little calves in the barn. They were so sweet. One was fawn colored and the other was red, and their hair was so soft and their large eyes so wondering. Laura's heart beat fast when Ma talked to Pa about making cheese. Pa would not kill either of his calves because they were two heifers, and they would both grow into female calves. He went to Grandpa's and to Uncle Henry's to talk about the cheese making, and Uncle Henry said he would kill one of his calves, and there would be enough rennet for Aunt Polly and Grandma and Ma, so they even shared that. So Pa went again to Uncle Henry's and came back with a piece of the little calf's stomach. It was like a piece of soft grayish white leather, all ridged and rough on one side. When the cows were milked at night, Ma set the milk away in pans. In the morning, she skimmed off the cream to make into butter later. We remember our butter, boys and girls, from the cream. When the morning's milk had been cooled, she mixed it with the skimmed milk that she had and set it all on the stove to heat. A bit of rennet tied into a cloth was soaking in warm water. When the milk was heated enough, Ma squeezed every drop of water from the rennet in the cloth, and then she poured the water into the milk. She stirred it well and left it in a warm place by the stove. In a little while it thickened into a smooth, quivery mass, probably a texture a little bit like the slime that you like to play with, which you're thinking sounds really interesting, except I don't want to eat cheese that's that texture, do you? So there's got to be a little something that we still have to do. With a long knife, Ma cut this mass into little squares and let it stand while the curd separated from the whey. Then she poured it into a cloth and let the thin, yellowish whey drain out. When no more whey dripped from the cloth, Ma emptied the curd into a big pan and salted it, turning and mixing it well. It sounds to me like the whey is sort of a little bit of a liquid, because they said that it drains off and that the curd is left over. So it sounds to me like when they boiled the slime, some of it became solid and some became liquid. Laura and Mary were always there, helping all they could. They loved to eat bits of the curd when Ma was salting it. It squeaked in their teeth. Under the cherry tree outside the back door, Pa had put up the board to press the cheese on. He had cut 2 grooves the length of the board and laid the board on blocks, one end a little higher than the other. Under the lower end stood an empty pail, and I'm going to show you a picture of that board now. Let's see, to get up close with you. There's the board. One side is higher, the other side is lower, and there's the bucket. I would assume that that's so that any other liquid that needs to drain off will go down the hill and into the bucket. And there's the cheese wheel that they're going to use to make the curds. Ma put her wooden cheese hoop on the board, spread a clean wet cloth all over the inside of it, and filled it heaping full of the chunks of salted curd. She covered this with another clean wet cloth and laid it on top of a round board, cut small enough to go inside the cheese hoop, and then she lifted a heavy rock and set it on top of the board. So in other words, she put all of the curd in together, put a couple of clean wet cloths on it, and then put something heavy on top of it to press it down so that it goes from being individual little lumps to being one round mass. I'm going to show you a little bit of what that might look like. This is a small wheel of Gouda cheese. As you can see, it was still made in the old-fashioned way with the wheel, and initially it was different chunks, but then it got set down in a circle and pressed hard so that it was made into a wheel of solid cheese. All day long, the round board settled slowly under the weight of the rock, and whey pressed out and ran down the grooves of the board into the pail. So more liquid is separating from the solid cheese. The next morning, the Ma would take out the round, pale yellow cheese, as large as a milk pan, and then she would again make more curd the next day and fill the cheese hoop again. Every morning she took the new cheese out of the press and trimmed it smooth. She sewed a cloth tightly around it and rubbed the cloth all over with fresh butter. And then she put the cheese on a shelf in the pantry. We don't put our cheese in the pantry, we put it in the refrigerator. Cheese can, when it forms a hard crust on the outside, be stored someplace cool like a pantry, but it is safer and a lot less bacteria develops on it if cheese is stored in a cold refrigerator. I bought cheese probably the way that you see it a lot. This is the way that we mostly buy cheese. Sliced and ready for sandwiches or in a plastic bag. That's not actually how the cheese is originally made and packaged. Let's see. Every day she would wipe every cheese wheel carefully with a wet cloth and then rub it all over with fresh butter once more and then lay it down on its other side. After a great many days, the cheese was ripe and there was a hard rind all over it. A rind is like what you would see on the outside of a piece of bread, how it's soft and how it's soft in the middle, but on the outside it's crunchy and hard. Then Ma would wrap the cheese in paper and lay it away on a high shelf, and then there was nothing left to do with it but eat it. Laura and Mary liked cheese making. They liked to eat the curd that squeaked in their teeth, and they liked to eat the edges that Ma pared off the big round yellow cheese to make them smooth before she sewed them up in cloth. Ma laughed at them for eating green cheese. The moon is made of green cheese, some people say, she told them. Let's see, we were about 200 years before the first, well, I guess about 100 years before the exploration of the moon. So she's believing that the moon looks like green cheese. What did you believe before you learned the truth, boys and girls, when you were little? The new cheese did look like the round moon when it came up behind the trees, but it was not green. It was yellow like the moon. It's green, Ma said, because it hasn't ripened yet. When it's cured and ripened, it won't be a green cheese. So it has to ripen just like fruit and vegetables on a vine, boys and girls. Is the moon really made of green cheese? Laura asked, and Ma laughed. I think people say that because it looks like a green cheese, she said, but appearances are deceiving. And then while she wiped all the green cheeses and rubbed them with butter, she told them about the dead cold moon that is like a little world on which nothing grows. The first day Ma made cheese, Laura tasted the whey. She tasted it without saying anything to Ma, and when Ma turned around and saw her face, she laughed. That night when she was washing the supper dishes and Mary and Laura were wiping them, Ma told Pa that Laura had tasted the whey and didn't like it. You wouldn't starve to death on Ma's whey like old Grimes did on his wife's, Pa said. Laura begged him to tell her about old Grimes. So, although Pa was tired, he took the fiddle out of the box and played for Laura. Old Grimes is dead, that good old man. We ne'er shall see him more. He used to wear an old gray coat, all buttoned down before. Old Grimes's wife made skim milk cheese. Old Grimes he drank the whey. Then came an east wind from the west and blew old Grimes away. There's poor old Grimes, so thin because his wife made skim milk cheese and only let him drink the whey. There you have it, said Pa. She was a mean, tight-fisted woman. If she hadn't skimmed off all the milk, a little cream would have run off in the way, and old Grimes might have staggered along. But she skimmed off every bit of cream, and poor old Grimes got so thin that the wind blew him away, plumb starved to death. Then Pa looked at Ma and said, Nobody'd starve to death while you were around, Caroline. Well, no, Ma said. No, Charles, not if you were there to provide for us. Pa was pleased. It was all so pleasant, the doors and windows wide open to the summer evening, the dishes making little cheerful sounds together as Ma washed them and Mary and Laura wiped them, and Pa putting away the fiddle and smiling and whistling softly to himself. After a while he said, I'm going to go over to Henry's tomorrow morning, Caroline, to borrow his grubbing hoe. Those sprouts are getting waist high around the stumps in the wheat field. A man just has to keep everlasting at it, or the woods will take back the place. A man has to keep everlasting at it, or the woods will take back the place. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that might mean. He cleared out a bunch of land away from the trees, boys and girls, so that he could grow things on it, like wheat. But he's saying that the sprouts are getting waist high around the stumps in the wheat field. The sprouts are baby trees. So the tree is still trying to send out baby trees to grow back the woods. And he's going to have to dig them all up so that his clearing where he's growing the wheat for his family to eat doesn't become the woods again. By early next morning, he started to walk to Uncle Henry's, but before long he came back, hurrying, hitched the horses to the wagon, threw in his axe, the 2 wash tubs, the wash boiler, and all the pails and wooden buckets there were. I don't know if I'll need 'em all, Caroline, he said, but I'd hate to want 'em and not have 'em. Oh, what is it? What is it? Laura asked, jumping up and down with excitement. Pa's found a bee tree, Ma said. Maybe he'll bring us some honey. It was noon before Pa came driving home. Laura had been watching for him, and she ran out to the wagon as soon as she stopped by the barnyard, but she could not see into it. Pa called, Caroline, if you'll come take this pail of honey, I'll go unhitch. Ma came to the wagon disappointed. She said, well, Charles, even a pail of honey is something. And then she looked into the wagon and threw up her hands. Pa laughed. All the pails and buckets were heaping full of dripping golden honeycomb. Both tubs were piled full, and so was the wash boiler. Pa and Ma went back and forth carrying the 2 loaded tubs and the wash boiler and all the buckets and the pails into the house. Ma heaped a plate high with the golden pieces and covered all the rest neatly with cloths. For dinner, they had as much of the delicious honey as they could eat, and Pa told them how he had found the bee tree. I didn't take my gun, he said, because I wasn't hunting, and now it's summer. There wasn't much danger of meeting trouble. Panthers and bears are so fat this time of year that they're lazy and good-natured. In other words, boys and girls, they've had so much to eat that they're not in the mood to eat, Pa. They just want to lay around in the sunshine and relax, because there's good hunting right now. Well, I took a shortcut through the woods, and I nearly ran into a big bear. I came around a clump of underbrush, and there he was, not as far away from me as across this room. He looked around at me, and I guess he saw I didn't have a gun. Anyway, he didn't pay any more attention to me. He was standing at the foot of a big tree, and bees were buzzing all around him. They couldn't sting him through his thick fur, and he just kept brushing them away from his head with one paw. I stood there watching him, and he put the other paw into a hole in the tree and drew it out all dripping with honey. He licked the honey off his paw and reached in for more. By that time, I had found me a club. I wanted that honey myself. There's that bear, digging all that honey out of that bee tree, and the bees buzzing around angry, trying to get that bear away. Poor bees, working so hard for that honey. And then that mean bear stealing it all for himself. So I made a great racket, banging the club against a tree and yelling. The bear was so fat and so full of honey that he just dropped on all fours and waddled off among the trees. I chased him some distance and got him going fast, away from the bee tree, and then I came back for the wagon. Laura asked him how he got the honey away from the bees. That was easy, said Pa. I left the horses back in the woods where they wouldn't get stung, and then I chopped the tree down and split it open. Did the bees sting you? No, said Pa. Bees never sting me. The whole top of the tree was hollow and filled from top to bottom with honey. The bees must have been storing honey there for years. Some of it was old and dark, but I guess I got enough of good clean honey to last us a long time. Laura was sorry for the poor bees. She said they worked so hard and now they won't have any honey. But Pa said there was lots of honey left for the bees, and there was another large hollow tree nearby, into which they could move. He said it was time they had a clean new home. They would take the old honey he had left in the old tree, make it into fresh new honey, and store it in their new house. They would save every drop of the spilled honey and put it away, and they would have plenty of honey again long before winter came. So the bees store up food for the winter, just like Pa and Ma. The next chapter is called Harvest, and we will read it next time. But in the meantime, as I promised, it's time for you to put on your summertime gear, even though the wind is howling and the fire is going and it's cold outside. Let's listen to a little summertime song. Boys and girls, have a great day, and I'll see you again very soon for our next chapter.